So welcome to today's episode of the Tech Talk Show with me, Kazeem, this afternoon. Today we're going to be talking Azure DevOps in the real world. And I've got Has Altaiar with me on today's episode to help us do justice to the topic. I'm really excited to have you join us on the Tech Talk Show this afternoon, Has.
Thanks, Kazeem. Pleasure to be with you.
Okay. So, Has, let's begin things with an introduction. For the listeners, for those listening in, can you kindly help us with an introduction of yourself and tell us about what you do?
Sure. My name is Has Altaiar. I'm a director of VNext Consulting based in Melbourne, Australia. I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP. That stands for Most Valuable Professional for Microsoft Azure and for AI. I've been helping customers doing things on Microsoft Azure or public cloud for the last 8 years or so.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. So let's jump right in now. There are a lot of subfields in software engineering, right? We have mobile app development, there's machine learning, there's big data, and we also have DevOps. So it would be nice for you to be able to walk us through things. Has what exactly is DevOps, and how is DevOps different from these other subfields of software engineering?
Yeah, it's certainly a buzzword that's been getting a lot of traction in the industry. DevOps really all about in fundamentally it's really all about shortening the feedback loop cycle. So when you build a software, you build a piece of software and then you want to test it. You get the result from the test, and then hopefully it's going to tell you whether it is doing what you are expecting or it's not. So that's really the feedback loop cycle. And what DevOps really does, it's really all about shortening that feedback loop cycle. In large organizations, when there are multiple people, multiple teams working on building a platform or building a feature, as you can imagine, there is a lot of effort in making sure that everybody is contributing their part, testing is done, validation is done, and then that piece of software is being deployed correctly. So it takes a lot of time. Traditionally, we had development teams, people who are building the software, and then they ship that piece of software into another team, which is the operations team. And that team is responsible for deploying that piece of software and then maintaining it. Now, DevOps is really all about integrating the different teams, different tools, different processes, so that it shortens that feedback loop cycle. So the term DevOps really refers to the integration of development and operations. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a view. It's worth noting that although now it's becoming mainstream that there are roles called DevOps Engineer, originally that wasn't the plan, because it was meant to be that everybody in development and in operation is working together as one team. But now we have DevOps engineers and DevOps roles.
Okay. Thank you for that, As. So what does the daily routine of a DevOps engineer looks like? Can you throw a bit more light on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, initially there was no intention the intention was to have an integration of the different teams and processes so that you have an accelerated innovation. But now we have dedicated roles for DevOps. Now, what we see in the industry, a lot of these DevOps roles are really, it's like an evolution of the traditional operations team or operations role. So somebody who is responsible for managing the environments in the cloud, securing the environment, keeping the costs under control, managing deployments, managing access to different teams and different people. So on a typical day, depending on the organization and the maturity level, because different organizations are at a different maturity level, in an organization that have adopted DevOps practices properly, and they have integration of the different teams, there wouldn't be really specifically a DevOps engineer, but there would be somebody that's helping in um, making sure that environments are alive, doing a lot of the automation, making sure that deployments are going smoothly, making sure that there is a lot of verification and validation, making sure that deployments happen in a blue-green kind of deployments, making sure that the platform is highly available. Where on the other end of the spectrum, where you go into enterprises or organizations that are that have lower maturity when it comes to DevOps, then you might find somebody in the DevOps team that's really all they are doing is really just deploying a piece of software, providing access to someone, and provisioning services as needed.
Okay, okay. Thank you for that, As. So when the DevOps people talk, I often hear them using terms like pipelines, version control a lot, right? In their conversations. So I want to ask you, can you walk us through a little bit of some of these terminologies now? What does pipeline? What does the pipeline mean? What does version control, source control? What do they all mean?
Sure. So,
And I'd like you to assume zero knowledge now for our viewers, people listening in.
sure. So, a pipeline, a good way of explaining a pipeline, you can think of it as a step, a sequence of steps. In the example that we talked about before, let's say you have developed a piece of software. Let's say you built a mobile application for a bank. So your mobile application would have some web pages that people would visit these web pages and fill in their details or do money transfer or something like that. Behind the scene, there is also a database. So beside these web pages, there is also a database or something that stores the customer's data and how much money they owe and things like that. When you want to deploy this piece of software from one environment, from the developer's, let's say, own machine into a server so that other people can access it, let's call that the production environment. When you want to deploy this piece of software, you could deploy it manually, but that's a dangerous approach because there could be a lot of problems with that. First, if a defect happens and you wanted to fix it, you can't fix it because you don't know what was running on your machine. If there was a malware on your machine, then that malware would go into the production environment, for example. There could be a lot of problems with that. So what people do in a DevOps environment, what people would do, they would write what's called a deployment pipeline. And a pipeline is really a sequence of steps. So it's an automation script that would tell the server, for example, first I want you to package these web pages as a zip file, then transfer the zip file into the server, for example, then deploy this database, so copy these database scripts, for example, into the server, and then make this DNS name point into the server. I hope some of these things make sense. It's hard to know with zero knowledge. When you are someone who's been in the industry for a while, it's hard to know with zero knowledge. But hopefully this makes some sense to people where it's really a sequence of steps. So if I'm trying to give you direction how to get into the milk shop down the road, I would tell you go first straight, then you take right, and then you take left. So that's kind of a pipeline. It's really just a sequence of steps. Now, the other part about the versioning or the source control, when you are developing software, you want to make sure that you have a way of maintaining the full history of the software. So that would help you with two things, or many things, but two things are important. One is it helps you with in collaboration. If there are other people that are helping you with the software, you want to make sure that changes that are coming from the different parties are not overwriting each other. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if there was a defect and you wanted to go back in time and fix that defect, you want to make sure that you are fixing the defect into the software version that's running in production. And for that, we use source control tools. The one that's probably most popular at the moment is becoming the de facto. Is called Git.
Okay.
So that's what most people use. And basically what it does, it allows us to write software while other people can collaborate with us and update on the same, push updates into the same software. So it allows people of 10, 100 people working on the same software together at the same time. And if you were not using this tool, if you wanted to use all work on the same file, it would be just a nightmare because multiple people updating the same file at the same time. It just won't work.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. So I like the way you were able to help us simplify things. But Has, it would be cool for us to know what kind of problems DevOps helps us solve. Can you walk us through some few real-world examples of how DevOps can help us in the real world that everybody, I guess, can relate to?
Sure. So one customer that I have been working with for a good time now. It's a large enterprise here in Australia. This customer has a team of about 30 to 50 people building this software. And they are trying to deploy the software into Microsoft Azure cloud, into the public cloud. Now, when I started with this customer, every time, so they were following agile methodologies. Not sure how many people know about agile methodologies. Basically, it's a way of iteratively developing software. So let's say every month they will ship new features into their platform. So with this customer, they were shipping features every 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks, they would have a new release and then they would have a new deployment. Every time they were deploying a new software, it was taking them from 1 to 2 days or sometimes a week to get deployments ready. So the development team would take 6 weeks to develop the features. And then by the end of the 6 weeks, they would say, we are ready. And then it would go into this DevOps team that's supposed to take these changes and then deploy them. Every time they try to deploy it, it would take them a couple of days because there's always misconfigurations. There is always something that was missed. There is always something that didn't go to plan. And then something would fall apart. So as you can imagine, if it's a production system, people are using the software and you are having downtime more than few minutes, sometimes takes a day, sometimes takes 2 days. That's a big problem, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other problem, the second problem, every time they try to deploy these changes, they have a big team of testers. They have 10, 15 testers that are manually going and testing things. And every time you change something, these people are going to have to repeat their work. So that's a lot of wasted work. And then the third problem was that the cost of running the environment was just going ridiculously high. So they were paying something more than $60,000, $70,000 a month. So what we did, we spent a few weeks sitting with them, looking at their processes, looking at how they were developing their software. And within just a few weeks, we tried to help them with some automations. We tried to help them reduce their test. So instead of having a team of 10 people testing the same thing over and over, we have automated some of these tests so that they would run automatically. Now, you don't need to have somebody going and running these tests. You can just see there, which means that you can deploy changes much faster. We help them reduce their cost. Their cost reduced by about $500,000. So that's another good thing. And we reduced their deployment time from having deployment taking a week into deployment taking 20 minutes, 15 minutes.
Wow.
So you could see the kind of benefits that the customer would get, and that's why it's creating this big buzz. A lot of people talk about DevOps.
Yes, that's really very significant benefits, improvement compared to what they have before. Now, let's talk about DevOps skill acquisition for a bit. So if we have people new to DevOps and, are considering a career in DevOps, So what would your advice be for these people? What resources would you recommend that they use, and where would you advise them to start from?
Yeah, interestingly, so DevOps is really all about making sure that deployments are faster. Most of the time, this is mostly related to public cloud. So we're talking about the big cloud vendors. So we're talking about Microsoft Azure, we're talking about Amazon AWS, and we're talking about Google GCP. Um, so each of these cloud vendors, they have actually their own documentation and they have their own um, interactive materials that help you with acquiring the skills that you need. Um, we have come a long way in as an industry, as community, from the old days where the engineer themselves have to invest a lot of money and time in acquiring the materials to learn. Now it's actually the companies, the cloud vendors like the Microsoft and Amazon and Google, that are actually investing a lot of money to have people learn the skills because it's actually in their interest. The more people learn Azure, the more work Microsoft is going to get. The more people learn AWS, the more consumption and the more money that Amazon is going to get. So if anybody is wanting to learn, I would say really start with the cloud vendor. If you are interested in learning about Microsoft Cloud or trying to be a DevOps on a cloud vendor, let's say on Microsoft Cloud, then start with Microsoft documentation. Um, Microsoft has a really good interactive website called Microsoft Learn, and they have changed their certificates or their whole certification program have changed recently. So now it's career based or career path based. So if you go to their certification and you say, I want to be a DevOps, it would actually show you the number of courses that you can do. It's all free. It's all interactive. There are also supported labs that you can do for free online. And you can learn all the skills. You don't have really to pay. You don't have to pay anything. You can learn it all online. And you can do not just in theory, not just learn it by reading a paper, but you can also learn it in practice. That's called Microsoft Learn. I'm sure Amazon AWS have a similar thing. Google Cloud has a similar thing. So these probably would be the best places to start. And I would think that would actually get you a fairly long way.
Okay. So how long do you think it's going to take someone who is new, a newbie, to really get proficient and start making some money, start doing some work with DevOps?
It really varies. It depends on it depends on your circumstances. So where are you starting from? So for example, if you are starting, let's say you are a help desk today, you are somebody that's helping organizations and you are help desk in your organization, or you are an IT admin in your organization. So you're already helping your current employer managing servers or managing desktop or something like that. If you are somebody like that, I would think it would take you probably 2-3 months. You just get the certification, you learn a few materials, you can practice few things, and I think you will be on your way. If you are a developer, if you are a software engineer or software developer, I would think it would take you probably similar time. But if you are somebody who is coming from an outside field, I don't know, I've met people in Australia, people who have been a truck driver and became a software engineer, or people who were an electrical engineer and then became a software developer. And that's why I'm saying if you are coming as somebody who is not familiar with the whole technology landscape, then it might take you a lot longer.
Oh, okay. So thank you very much for that insight, Has. I was asking earlier, about the infrastructure people. So is DevOps, is this something they also have to learn, or can we just trust it to just the developers alone, or everybody needs to learn DevOps?
Well, interestingly, the boundaries between infrastructure and application is really diminishing. So previously, we had a very clear distinction. Somebody is looking at the infrastructure, managing the servers, managing the networking and the security and everything. And then somebody is writing the software, and then somebody managing the data. We call them database administrators or things like that. Now,
Yes.
in the cloud environment, these boundaries are diminishing. So you can deploy infrastructure by writing 2 or 3 lines of code. So you could deploy a server, you could configure a network, you could configure a VPN, you could configure security, configure firewall, all from code. And that's
Yeah.
the new thing that's called infrastructure as code.
On the code. Yeah.
It's becoming a mainstream. Everybody is using it. So that's why the boundaries between development, operations, infrastructure, and data is really diminishing. So it's
Yeah.
something that everybody really needs to learn and upskill, whether you are coming from infrastructure or from a development background. Pretty much everybody needs to step up.
Okay. So for Azure DevOps, my last question now for you. For Azure DevOps, is there a language, a particular language of choice now that people would need to learn to start doing great things with Azure DevOps, or can they just come with any programming language of their choice? Or what do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. So there are multiple things at play. So first, there is the platform that's called Azure DevOps. So
Yes.
Azure has a platform that's called Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
When Azure DevOps is basically really just a platform that helps you run the tasks. So we talked about pipeline being a sequence of steps. And
Yes.
Azure Pipeline just tells you can write your sequence of steps in command shell. You could write them in Microsoft PowerShell, or you could write them in other tools, and then Microsoft would just run those. Now, to provision the infrastructure, to do the deployment and things like that, again, you could do the same thing. You could write them in just shell commands. A lot of people choose to do things even sometimes with programming languages like Python, for example, or even Go, and then have those as executable files that you would just execute them, and then they would do the deployment. Essentially, at the end, what you're trying to get is really a consistent, repeatable process that would allow you to deploy your changes or create your platform. So that's really the key. You could use Python, you could use shell script, you could use Microsoft PowerShell, you could use Azure CLI. But yeah, there is really no limit on what language you want to use.
Okay, okay. And by the way, you mentioned the Azure DevOps platform. Is this platform something that is free, or is something people will have to pay for?
So there is a free version of it. When you create a free account, you get certain number of minutes. So basically, when you have a pipeline to execute and deploy something, that's all measured by minutes. How much minutes it's going to take for your pipeline. Out of the box with free version, you get, I think, like an hour or 2 hours. I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
But then if you want more, you need to pay more. But Azure
Yeah.
DevOps is not just one, is just one platform. One very popular platform is GitHub. And I would encourage all your listeners, if anybody is trying to learn, GitHub is a very open platform where a lot of people will collaborate. People and organizations will collaborate and put their code there. So if you are interested in learning, GitHub would be a great place to start. You can host your code for free. You can execute pipelines for free. And the beauty of GitHub, because it has a lot of open source projects, it gives you the ability to explore other people's code and learn from them without you having to be part of their team.
Okay. Thank you very much, as for your time and for joining us today on the show. So this is how much time is going to take us. It's going to permit us on today's episode of the Tech Talk. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, you can do so on YouTube. So it's the Tech Talk Wednesday on YouTube. So up there, you can have a rewatch of this particular video that you're listening to now, and then the previous episodes as well. Has, I'm going to leave you with the parting word now. Any last words before we say goodbye?
Now, thanks a lot for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and yeah, all the best for all your listeners.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. So you've heard it from Has. So let's do this again another time and continue to keep safe. So from myself and Has, it's bye-bye from us.
Thanks all.